Hello, and welcome to Communicating Science with the Beneski Museum of Natural History. I'm Annika Baldwin, an intern at the Beneski this summer and a biology student here at Amherst College. Today I'm talking to Matthew Inabinett, someone who used to be a docent at the museum just like I am. He graduated from Amherst in 2018 with a bachelor's in geology. He then went on to earn a master's in paleontology from East Tennessee State University in 2020. Currently, he works as a collections assistant at the Gray Fossil Site and Museum, where he catalogs and curates fossils mostly from the Gray Fossil Site. I was very excited to meet Matthew because he's something of a Beneski legend. I've been told many times about he combed through all the labels in the museum and made over 100 updates. The poster that accompanied his senior thesis still hangs in a prime spot in the geology building years later. And most importantly, apparently he can do a killer Elvis impression. Hello, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining me today. The first thing I want to ask you is, how did you become interested in science?
Well, this is one of those answers that you probably hear a lot is I was always really interested in the natural world ever since I was a little kid. I really liked animals, mainly like living animals. I was not really into dinosaurs for a while. They kind of scared me when I was a little kid, but then I saw Walking with Dinosaurs on TV and it still kind of scared me, but it was really exciting. And from about the age of 4 or 5, I pretty much knew that I wanted to work in paleontology. So I've kind of stuck to it. I think most 5-year-olds think they want to be a paleontologist for like a little bit, but most of them are over it by about 10. I was not. So I pretty much have everything I have done like with education wise has been okay. So how is this going to help me when I go into paleontology? That's been like the career path I've wanted to be on since I was a wee little child.
Wow, that's impressive that you've
Yeah.
stayed interested for that long. Did
I
you
mean,
ever think for a second you wanted to be anything else?
well, earlier on, I thought, I wanted to work maybe like in a zoo, like work with modern animals. But my parents kept reminding me, I was a little like, Matthew, you're scared of like all animals. Like you like them, but you're like, you don't want to be near them.
Mhm.
That was, even at the time, I was like, that's kind of true. So, I mean, every now and then I do have this little like twinge where it's like, I could have been like a science writer and gone like down the English path or something, or it really would be neat to work in like wildlife management and work with a zoo or something like that. But nope, it's really, I've been pretty set on fossil animals.
Mhm. Less likely to attack you, I guess.
Yeah, you're more likely to hurt them, right? Because they're all
Mm,
dead and glued together.
good point. So, you're a graduate from Amherst College. What did you do to pursue paleontology while you were here?
Well, I decided I'd be a geology major because that seemed like a good time, and obviously Beneski was like, whoosh, just caught my attention, reeled me right in. That was one of the just like the things about Amherst that really made me want to go there. Like put it pretty high on the list of colleges I was applying for. Like, it's got a pretty swank museum. It's got a nice museum.
Oh yeah.
So that was a huge part. And what I did to pursue paleontology stuff was one of the first things I did was I think it was my second day on campus. I walked into Beneski with someone I just met, trying to make friends. So I mentioned to someone, oh, I'm interested in paleo. Have you been to the museum yet? And they said, no, I haven't, but we could go check it out. I said, okay, cool, let's go. And I was showing them around and talking about the things that were there. And Fred is sort of following me around and like, clearly listening in.
The person Matthew is talking about here is Fred Venn, Beneski Museum educator and the director of the Bassett Planetarium and Wilder Observatory. He works closely with all the student docents.
After my new friend, departed, and Fred kind of approached me and was like, do you have a job yet? I said, no. And he said, do you want one? And I said, yes, very much. So that is how
Wow.
I hired at Beneski, which is Amherst there are many wonderful things about Amherst College. Amherst is where if I could come back and work at this museum, like that is my ultimate career goal, is to be Haley or Fred.
Haley Singleton is the head of collections and operations at the Beneski. And for the record, Fred has told me many times that Matthew should have his job. Like I said, he's a Beneski legend.
But like that was the most important thing for me, both from a science standpoint, because I got to be like, hear what was going on, both at the department and just at the museum, talk to people and feel this urge to learn more about what I was talking about to visitors. But also it really honed my ability to talk to people about science, which I think is something that all scientists need, but paleontologists, that is the reason paleontology exists. We cannot possibly justify our existence as a field without public education. Like that is what we need to be doing more than anything else. Like all the research is cool, but if you're not disseminating it to the public, then it's pointless, I think. So another thing I did, and Amherst was really cool about this, the geology department, the folks in the geo department are brilliant and often very laid back.
Mm-hmm.
So they were pretty open to me trying to pursue more paleo stuff. And one way that happened was, I wanted to do my thesis. I knew I wanted to do an undergrad thesis, and I wanted to do it like a paleontology one on, I did it on the Dryosaurus.
Yes.
The little dryosaur at the museum. The finest specimen, now that the stuff at the Carnegie Museum has been split into its own species, Dryosaurus elderae. Our Dryosaurus at Amherst is the finest specimen of Dryosaurus altus in the world.
I did not know that. Dryosaurus is a fast-running herbivore from the late Jurassic in North America. It has a long tail that makes it about 10 feet long, but it's only about 3 or 4 feet tall. It has a beak with teeth in the back. There aren't very many well-preserved specimens, so the mounted Dryosaurus altus with 47% original material is a point of pride for the Beneski.
Yeah, so ours is the one at Amherst is definitely the most complete individual of that species that I am aware of, because the only other like fairly complete ones were from the Carnegie Quarry at Dinosaur National Monument, and those all went to the Carnegie Museum. And they are now a separate species of Dryosaurus as of 2018. And I think that's been something that people have not found controversial. That's something people had been talking about for a while. Like, some of the Dryosaurs from Utah look kind of different than the Wyoming ones. I said that in my thesis, but I was like, I don't know what it means yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like later that year, there was a paper that came out and said, yeah, there are different species. So that's kind of cool. But I did my thesis on that, and none of the professors in the department were like paleontologists, vertebrate paleontologists, but we have Marjorie Coombs, who's an adjunct professor, and they basically were like, hey, we have the capacity to have her basically be your advisor.
Marjorie Coombs is an emeritus professor of the biology department at UMass Amherst. Her research focuses on vertebrate paleontology, and she has taught classes on paleontology for the 5-college consortium.
And it was, I just found it was really cool that they were interested enough in what a student wanted to do to like pull the strings of like, yeah, we can have you take like a one-on-one class with Marjorie. You can to like get your osteology knowledge up, and she can be like your thesis advisor. Peter will sign all the paperwork, but really Marjorie will do all the actual advising. And now, of course, I'm studying mammals, which is what Marjorie actually works on. So it's like, oh, okay, fine. But
Gotcha.
I've moved on. It's like, yeah, she's like, well, I don't really work on dinosaurs. Her husband, Walter, is a dinosaur paleontologist, but yeah, now it's like, well, now I do what you do. Now I look at big, like large herbivorous mammals. That's
super cool. I saw in your bio that you're currently working on stuff with the mastodon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you interested in that?
Yes.
What was that? Something about its lower teeth? What is that? Or what are you talking about with lower teeth?
As you've seen, the mastodon at Beneski is the reason I wanted to do this project. Like from the first time I looked at that for like more than a minute, I was like, someone has got to do something with this. And what it is sometimes the American mastodon, or mastodons in general, but particularly the American mastodon, Mammut americanum, sometimes they don't have tusks in their lower jaw like elephants today, and sometimes they do. And sometimes the tusks are really tiny, and sometimes they're actually pretty big and clearly would have been used for something, like they have worn in, so the animals were using them probably in foraging. But nobody has ever really established what why. At the time that mastodon was briefly described in 1917 or 1918 by Professor Loomis, the idea was that males had the tusks and females didn't. That's probably not the case, at least in this species of mastodon. In some European mastodons, it looks like it probably is a sexually dimorphic character. But in the mastodons in North America, the later mastodons in North America at least, it seems like tusks are a really variable thing. They're being lost in general, but sometimes you see them and sometimes you see fairly large ones. Mm-hmm. And with the idea that the big tusks are probably functional, like what would control why they show up and when they show up? And I have some preliminary data that suggests that it's probably mastodons in warmer intervals. Because you think about the Ice Age, we think, oh, it got really cold for a long time. No, it got kind of cold for a while and then really warm for a while and then actually cooler during summer but warmer in the winter for a while. It was not just they turned on the AC and everything got cooler. So animals are adapting to these different climate regimes that were changing over a few tens of thousands to a few hundreds of thousands of years. And we think maybe during some of the warmer intervals, you see mastodons with tusks. Maybe they're living in a different environment. They're foraging on different food sources. And this is kind of supported by the idea that we don't really think of American mastodons with tusks. And that's because when we think American mastodons, we think late glacial, upper Midwest, upstate New York animals are like kind of what defines our idea of what the American mastodon is like. And those are animals that are living in like boreal forest or pine parkland environments and not cypress swamp or southeastern prairie or longleaf pine savanna. They're living in these different, probably less diverse habitats, whereas in warmer intervals, you might have more food sources or different things that mastodons might be foraging on that might require them, or they might benefit from having bigger tusks in their lower jaw, which is certainly interesting. And in fact, the one at Amherst has the largest lower tusks in any specimen of American mastodon that I have found.
Hey, impressive.
Yes, it is superlative animals. It's actually a composite. The skeleton is one mastodon. The lower jaw is a different one. It has the broadest teeth of any mastodon that I have seen measured. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the characteristics that's useful for defining mastodon species, it seems, is the relative length and width of the teeth. So ours has the relatively broadest teeth of any American mastodon, and also the largest lower tusks.
Oh, interesting.
Certainly, I'm not sure what it means, but it means something.
Huh. So I think maybe that means it's a different species than I think it is, or I mean, you said you don't know, but
I am in taxonomy. You tend to be either a lumper or a splitter, where you think either species or groups or whatever need to be divided thinly based on their differences or kept together based on the similarities. I am a splitter to my core. I think recognizing the differences between different groups of animals, especially fossil ones, is the easiest way to think about them and talk about them and see what's going on with them evolutionarily. But I don't think we have a good case to split the Amherst mastodons, the southeastern mastodons that have this morphology, from the typical American mastodon yet. It's something that potentially could happen, but I don't think that is the direction that I would go, simply because I think we're seeing adaptation to a local habitat in a group of animals where we don't have a great control on time. Mm-hmm. Like mastodons, like I said, from the upper Midwest and places like that, we have lots of really late ones that we've been able to date with radiometric dating. So people have a pretty good framework for what they're doing and when. But the Southeast has a much poorer constraint on that because a lot of stuff in the Southeast doesn't preserve datable collagen anymore. But that is something that other researchers and myself hopefully might be looking into in the near future, trying to get some datable samples from mastodons from the Atlantic and Gulf coastal plains to help kind of like get a framework to put these unusual morphologies on. We need both. People are really excited with Pleistocene animals about the possibilities of using genetics and isotopes and things to find out what their evolution and ecology was like. but those things also need a good morphological framework. You need to know what the bones are like and the teeth are like to hang that on something. So they kind of feed together. But then knowing what the morphology is like is only so useful if you don't have a good like chronology to put these forms into.
Huh. That's super cool. Honestly, I'd never really thought about how you tell the difference between species that are extinct. That's that sounds really complicated, and probably really hard, right? Since
Yeah,
there are
it's
so few remains.
well, that's one of the things about studying stuff from the Pleistocene is it's the only bit of paleontology where you actually like spoiled for choice. You know, Pleistocene stuff is not super uncommon. Like if you go to any like college museum in North America, they're going to have a mastodon. They're going to have at least a mastodon molar. They might have a whole jaw or a whole skeleton. You know, any major museum is going to have a pretty good collection of mastodons, probably at least some from the area, and then some that they got sent down to them from like Ohio or Missouri or something or North Carolina in the early 1800s or something like that. But it's just enough that you have this enormous wealth of data, but it's still frustratingly just remote enough in time that it's like, you know, there are big pieces that you're missing, and you can get to these like fine trends and fine details that you just couldn't if you're studying, say, late Cretaceous dinosaurs, just because like you're talking about a vast gulf of time. You know, talking about stuff 20,000 years ago versus 70 million years ago. You know, you're going to have way more options for what you can do and way more stuff preserved for the more recent Pleistocene stuff. But it's not like you can just go out and study what it actually does. It's like you're doing ecology one step too late, and you can't, like, you just missed the ability to go out and just do field studies on these animals. Like, you just missed the boat on it. So it's really frustrating because you can almost get there, but you know there are these gaps that like you can develop these really precise and broad ideas. And then the temptation is like very great to say, this is what it was like. It's like, but you don't have quite the whole picture. Like, you know, there's something else you're missing. So it's really exciting, really frustrating.
Yeah, I bet. How do you do it for something like Dryosaurus, like you were working on for your undergrad thesis, where you said that they've recently found that there are two species, right? The one at the other museum is a different species. How do you tell when there are so few bones, where ours is the best specimen of this, and it's only what 40% complete, and that's incredible.
Yeah, it's about 40% complete in like total number of bones. If you count the stuff that you can mirror to the other side, it's more like 80% complete.
Okay.
But like, with dinosaurs, it's just osteology. It's just comparing like this bone has this feature in this place and this one doesn't. This bone has a different morphology, different proportions. One of the things I think that was important for separating Dryosaurus altus, the type species of Dryosaurus what they have in Amherst, and Dryosaurus elderi, the Utah Dryosaurus, was Dryosaurus elderi has longer cervical vertebrae. It's got a slightly longer neck, but the vertebrae have a different proportion. And there's some differences in the pelvic morphology. I believe, I don't know if they talked about that in the paper, but there are, based on observing figures, there are some differences in the shape of like the ilium and things like that. So it is basically for dinosaurs, it's like, it's also sometimes time, which people say you shouldn't really use, but I feel like there is also a threshold where it's like, okay, these are not the same species. They're separated by like 40 million years. Yeah. But the Dryosaurus, these two species were potentially living at the same time. They're in the same sedimentary basin. So there could have been ecological factors keeping them separate. Of course, in paleontology, we have to kind of, and again, the studying stuff in the Pleistocene rather than like the Jurassic or the Permian or whatever, you've got, you have this opportunity Like in deeper time paleontology, it's easier to kind of remind yourself, it's like, this isn't really a species. And it's like today, even today, nobody can really quite agree on like, where do you draw the line? What do you call a species? But like, you know that you're talking about an animal that based solely on its morphology. And if you were to go back 150 million years and sample stuff that we're calling Dryosaurus elderi and Dryosaurus altus, you would probably find that they were breeding in the wild and weren't genetically different from each other, or that the morphology and the genetics showed that there were two different species, but they didn't line up. Like the morphology and the genetics like differed, but not like into two groups, you know?
Yeah.
That, or maybe they would have, maybe they really are actual. If we went back in time, we would see that they actually are two real different species, and we managed to figure that out because morphology was good enough. But it's only in like the most recent bits of paleontology, what I'm currently doing with Pleistocene stuff, where you can get, where you actually have the opportunity to be like, okay, so we can actually compare our morphological ideas of species with like genetic and ecological ideas of what species are, which is really interesting. And my advisor and I differ on how we think of that, because I think it's like, well, you know, hybridization is a part of nature. Even if things hybridize, it doesn't mean they're not different species. Whereas Chris is a little more on the end of, well, maybe we should just be talking about, you know, mammoths as one unit and not, you know, 3 or 4 species in North America. Like, oh no, they should definitely 3 or 4 species. Doesn't matter if they're all hybridizing. That's my splitter background.
That's so cool. So your poster on Dryosaurus is still upstairs in the 3rd floor, the geology department.
Yeah.
And Fred says that, I think, was it you who found that the specimen we have has like an extra toe or something?
Yeah, Dryosaurus only has 3 full digits. That's one of the unique things about them among most of the ornithopod or ornithopod-like dinosaurs. It is an ornithopod, but this group of beaked plant-eating dinosaurs, it varies depending on whose phylogenetic trees you follow and whose definition of ornithopoda you follow. It either includes most of the small bipedal beaked plant-eating dinosaurs, or pretty much just this group called Iguanodontia, which is a few small Dryosaurus and a few other small dinosaurs, the Dryosaurids and a few other smaller oddballs, and then the big beaked plant eaters, the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, and Iguanodon and their relatives. Most of the smaller, earlier forms have 4-toed feet. Dryosaurs do not. So when this specimen was being reconstructed by Western Paleontological Laboratory, that's what it is, I believe. I don't know if they're still around, but they're the ones who collected and reconstructed the Dryosaurus. They gave it a full 4th digit. Actually the metatarsal, so the first metatarsal, the first like foot bone, is legitimate. It is real. That dinosaur did have that, but it like they added a full toe to that, which it did not possess. Like it would have just had that little vestigial foot bone sitting like on the back of its foot, and in life you wouldn't have seen it. It would have been, you know, ensconced in the flesh of the foot.
Huh. So how did you catch that? How did you notice?
I was just looking through some, I was looking at other Dryosaurus specimens, at photos of other mounts, at papers that described them. And I was like, wait a minute, all of these things are talking about how that doesn't have a complete first digit. And I went and looked at it and I'm like, that's not original. Like that's reconstructed. And it's hard to tell on that Dryosaurus, on a lot of specimens. It's hard to tell what's real and what's original and what's reconstructed. The mastodon at Amherst is another one that's a pain in the can to try and tell what's real and what's not, because you can tell there are parts where it's real bone and like plaster reconstruction, but that the real bone has been painted to be the same color as the painted plaster reconstruction, because that's a product of a completely different time and philosophy and what museum displays were about.
That's
Uh,
crazy. I did not know
yeah,
they'd done
back
that.
then the idea was that the important thing was to make a mount, to make a display piece, to like make a complete skeleton that you could put out and be like, this is an American mastodon. This is what it's like. Whereas today, we would be a lot more, generally be a lot more cautious about compositing two individuals or more. And a lot of museums are, I've seen several museum exhibits that have the reconstructed material and the original material, if they include original material in amount, be very different colors, which can look kind of odd, but it's also kind of neat because you're like, okay, that's what's actually original. It's interesting. But the Dryosaurus is, it was kind of hard to tell just because the reconstruction done on it was really good.
Yeah.
So there were definitely places where I was like, is that real bone? Is that not? But those little first digit, short little stubby first digit toes were definitely added.
Huh. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
I just, every time I look at it, it's one of the most beautiful dinosaur specimens I've ever seen. I just want to go and break them all. Get off of it. You don't belong there.
Would you tell me a little bit about how the work you did at the Beneski as a docent? I've only worked here during COVID, so my job has been just to check people into the study space. I haven't really done the real job.
Oh, that is such a shame too, because that was by far my favorite thing about being at Amherst was that, you know, basically what I did was, and I worked on the weekend. I usually worked Saturday and Sunday afternoons.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, people would come in, and one of the cool things about being on a college campus is you get all kinds of people. You get, you know, people in the community who come all the time, people in the community who are just like, we've lived here for 12 years and only just found out about this place. You get students, you get like, and you get lots of field trips as well, both from, you know, college classes and 5 colleges courses. Like you could always tell when it was like between like spring break and the end of the semester, or like after fall break and before the end of the semester, the UMass extra credit biology assignment would be given. And so it would be, you'd start to see a trickle of UMass students coming in, looking at a sheet of paper and like looking around. Like, okay, yep, it's time for this. And after 2 weeks, you remember, like, the questions never changed. It's like, you're like, oh yeah. What's the difference between a mammoth and a mastodon? It's the teeth. Actually, it's a lot of things. The answer I like to give is about 35 million years, but people didn't get that one. So,
That's pretty good.
But yeah, it's so interacting with the public was like such a hoot, because it's just like paleontology, like people really like paleo.
Mm-hmm.
And I think paleontology is like the ultimate gateway drug to science,
Mm-hmm.
like more broadly. Because everybody, like, it's a known thing. Like, you spend any time on the internet, you hear people talking about, were you a space kid or a dinosaur kid?
Oh yeah.
You're either into paleontology or you're into astronomy. You know, those are the two like gateways to a broader appreciation of natural history and science and scientific inquiry. And I think paleontology is a really good one because it's just like, it has a certain like kind of mystery about it, I think, in a way that like stuff that's not to knock biology, but you can go and look at those animals, you know, and like physics is so made up, right? It's like, oh, does this particle actually? Okay, cut that part out too. No,
No, I like it. I like the physics slander.
Physics is so made up, right? It's like this part. It's like, oh yeah, we study a particle that might not actually exist, and even if it did, we wouldn't be sure we're actually studying it, right? But yeah, once you guys figured out gravity and all that, you've just been playing for time. It's like, oh, we got to justify our funding somehow, right? You know, it's like paleontology. Paleontology is really, it's very kind of detective-y. There's a lot of going back and seeing what people have done before you, what people have done, like what have people missed? Were there any clues that somebody didn't piece together? And as you find more and more pieces, it becomes easier and more rewarding to go back and look at something. It's like, okay, we've learned. That's actually the angle of paleontology I really enjoy. I think of myself as a historical paleontologist, in that I want to go back and look at specimens that were found 50 or 100 or 200 years ago and say, well, we've learned a lot since then. can we say something more now? And the answer is always, yes, we can. And that's how all science is, really, but I feel like paleontology really displays it in a very, like, of course that's how that would work kind of way. You know, it's like, oh yeah, you dug up more bones, so now you know more stuff, and now you can go look at the bones you dug up before. And I think that that's also, it's really fascinating because it's like, I mean, it's exciting. It's really interesting, right? People like mastodons, they like dinosaurs, they like big, scary marine reptiles and things. Like, it's really, so we have really interesting ways to get to capture people's interest and see, like, how do you actually do this from a scientific standpoint? How do you learn about these things? What can, and more than just like learning about the scientific process, it's also just like, what can that, like, what did you learn from it? You know, teaching people about Earth history and evolution, which is one of the things that I've noticed is lots of people, regardless of any issues people have from a religious background with Earth history and evolution, is people who are perfectly scientifically minded. Lots of people have no freaking idea how old the Earth is, or could not rough out to you like the last 500 million years, just broad strokes. You can't do it because, and this is something I learned from Fred, is any number over 1,000 is completely meaningless. Like, people cannot visualize anything above 1,000. It's like, that's about your cutoff. You know what 1,000 looks like. Anything higher than that is made up, pretty much. Like, your brain isn't gonna handle it. It's like, oh, so this thing lived, what, 60,000 years ago? 200 million years ago? Yeah, it's the same as 60,000, basically. No, it's really not, but it's hard to explain in a useful way without going into those, okay, if you put a grape on the, you know, at home plate and then stood out in the parking lot with an apple, that's the sun, kind of thing, you know? Yeah, those things are, they're neat to read, but you can't explain them to people, you know? It's like, it's not, you can't use that every time you have to say to someone, it's like, okay, so imagine there's a clock and every minute is 1,000,000 years and humans show up at midnight, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It's like, that's not really useful. It's a nice, like, it's a good 2-page spread in the book about paleontology. But you can't explain that to people. So it's like, that's one of those things, is you have to get people into it, and then it'll start to just make sense, you know, which I understand is like maybe not the goal of someone who's visiting a free college museum for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon, is to start to have their mind wired to think about, okay, now what does this tell me about all of Earth history? Like, well, you know, it's not really, they're probably not going to walk out the door being like, I have a new appreciation for the rise of jaws and the early Silurian as the most important innovation in vertebrate history. But, you know, it might be in there somewhere. And I think most people leave a natural history museum with more interest and more awareness of what has gone on behind the scenes, so to speak, for the current world we live in, than they did when they walk in, including people who do it for a living. You know, I certainly, like, you know, try and make sure that when I go to a zoo or a museum or something, I leave knowing something new about natural history and evolution and all that. And it's really, really fun way to approach it. It's like, well, what can I learn today? But I don't know, I just really enjoyed getting to engage with people about it, because it's something that everybody is interested in and isn't, and I don't mean this as a slam on, like, okay, I mean, it's like a tiny bit of a slam on how we learn science in like elementary and like middle and high school. It's like, paleontology does not ever get very much attention, like, which I kind of understand. It's like, yeah, fossils exist, they tell us about how the world used to be, but it's like, okay, can't you at least get people that'll learn the geologic time scale for the last, you know, 3 eras before they graduate 6th grade or something? It's not hard. But
real shame too, that so many kids' primary interests so early.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, yeah, everybody wants to be a paleontologist when they're 6. They think dinosaurs are the neatest stuff, or mammoths are the neatest things, and they're right. I mean, I'm not going to say they're not right, but so it is. I think it'd be, and those were some of our most eager and interested visitors. One of a huge demographic of visitors that we had at Beneski was kids who had come on one of the many times that one of the local schools does a field trip to Beneski, and then they brought their parents like the next weekend. They're like, oh, it was so fun. You should come check it out. And that was always fun because you get to see like an 8-year-old bringing their mom and dad in and being like, we were here last week on, you walk up, hi, welcome to the Beneski Museum. I was here last week on a field trip. Yeah, she was here last week and she just wanted to show us because she thought it was so cool. Oh, well, come on in.
Oh.
It's always, that was always really fun because you could see that is absolute concrete proof that it works, is the repeat visitor who has been there once before and then comes back a week or two later with their friend or their parents or whatever. And they're like, it was so cool. I had to bring my family to see it. I had to bring my best friend to see it. It's like, that was always such a rewarding thing. All right, we're doing what we're supposed to do. We have people engaged enough that, especially when they're a captive audience or their school, because like you didn't come here because you thought it was kind of neat. You came here because you were on a field trip and you had to come. It's like your class got dragged out here, and it's really fun to see those kids who are just like, especially like with middle and high school age kids who aren't into it to begin with. They're like, they're too cool for this. Middle schoolers are the worst, but they were also the best because if you're leading the tour, you're totally allowed to make fun of middle schoolers. Like you can pick on them. You can't do it to little kids. High schoolers are more on your level. Like a 7th grader, you can totally rag on them, and they're like, it's fine. Like the teacher is gonna be on your side. It's like, yeah, come on, geez. But then it was always really fun to see that, one of the kids who's there, like just trying to, goof off with their friend in the back, and you pull them up and make them an example of something. And then they're learning and they're engaged and they're a little embarrassed for a minute, but then they're like, oh, this is cool. This is fun. We're looking at a butt print from a dinosaur sitting down 190 million years ago. I did not even know that could exist. I'm like, well, yeah, it does. We have more than one actually.
That's so
stuff
cool.
like that. Yeah, it's a hoot.
What would your advice be to a kid who wants to become a paleontologist and take the same path you have?
Okay. Well, one thing I was actually talking about with someone earlier is if you want to go into paleo, and don't think that you just either have to be a professor or someone who goes out in the field to dig up bones in the desert, because those are not the only 2 jobs in paleontology. It is basically an academic field. You are probably eventually going to need to go to grad school, at least get a master's. You might not ever need to get a PhD. My plan currently is not to get a PhD. I have a master's in for what I want to do, which is collections management. That is generally a career path in which a master's is all the qualification. Like a doctorate is not required for most of these positions. But I would say, first of all, always be curious about the natural world around you. I would say being into paleontology has given me an enormously, just a far greater appreciation for life on Earth today. Like when I was a younger, like I said, I've always liked animals, but just thinking about ecology and evolution in the way that I do now, it's like I go outside and I'm way more interested in the natural world, and that feeds my interest in the fossil natural world as well. So it's a great feedback loop because you learn more about prehistory and you realize think of all the things that had to happen to make this particular area have the particular landscape and the particular fauna that it has. And then you think about that and you can it projects both directions. It's like looking at the natural world today makes you wonder more about it in the past, but learning more about it in the past makes you appreciate the natural world today a lot more greatly, I think. Read a lot, read anything you can get your hands on about paleo stuff, and read it with a critical mind, because a lot of paleontologists say things that are wrong a lot, and engaging critically with stuff people smarter than you said is important, because if you're paying attention, you can being able to evaluate the value of evidence. Like, do you have good evidence to back up what you're saying? Does it sound good on paper, but it's lacking a lot of weight to back it up? Here's one. I'll throw out a really controversial one that will probably get some people to really hate me. I don't buy that humans were a major cause of the extinction of megafauna in North America at the end of the Pleistocene.
Oh.
I think humans probably contributed to the extinction, but I think had humans not shown up, the extinction of most North American large mammals at the end of the Pleistocene, that went extinct would still have gone extinct, because I think climate was the bigger driver. And one of the reasons, especially when it comes to things like elephants, which is always what people want to go right for, is humans killed mammoths and mastodons. Yeah, they definitely killed the two most dangerous, large, hard to kill animals on the landscape first, and left behind no kill sites. There are literally two incontrovertible, this is a site where humans butchered an elephant. There are two sites in all of North America, both of them are in northern Arizona, where that is unquestionably what happened, where there is not any reasonable doubt that that is what you're looking at. So, but see, that's a fun one, because there's always a lot of evidence pushing both ways. Mm-hmm. It's like that. It's like that's one of the big ones. People really like that idea, and it makes a lot of sense on paper. But it's like, you're gonna have to show me more than two places where somebody killed an elephant for me to think that humans were hunting enough of them to drive them to extinction in 1,000 years. You know, maybe less than 1,000 years. Yeah. And then another one that, like I said, I was talking about this earlier with a friend, is when you get to the point where you're in your undergrad, you're doing your undergraduate work, and you're thinking about grad school, don't do what I did and think that you have to go right into grad school, which is what I did, and I'm glad that I did. Mm-hmm. But once I got here, I was stressing myself out, thinking like, oh my God, what if I don't get into a program? It's really gonna put me behind. It's gonna really impact my ability to continue in this field, because it's gonna be so hard to get into grad school, if I take a break. Then I got here, and in my cohort of 7 other new grad students, one other one was coming straight through. Like, everybody else had taken time off. Like, that's actually normal to take like a year or 2 or 3. I'm not saying that you have to do it, but if that's the point you're at, and you're like, and don't sweat it, that is actually not only fine, it is actually the norm. Most people do not go straight from their undergrad into their grad program, which is something that I wish I had known when I was a senior at Amherst. That would have certainly helped with my mental health a lot during the later part of my time at Amherst College. It's definitely the knowledge is like, hey, if you don't get into a grad program, it's going to be fine. That's not going to wreck your chances. That you're going to be like most everyone else. So obviously, if that's something you want to do, you want to go straight through, go for it. But if you're not so sure, then don't sweat it, because that's actually not what most people do. Yeah. Never underestimate the importance of talking to people about the stuff. That really is the bread and butter of paleontology and science in general, is science communication. You got to learn to love it, because people will surprise you, and it will really reinvigorate your love for your subject. I think nothing has excited me about paleontology like talking to curious people who don't really know that much about paleontology, but are fascinated to talk about it with someone and learn about it. Like, nothing gets me quite as excited about it as that.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's a ton of fun to hear all about your experiences at Amherst and your research. Thank you for listening to Communicating Science. See you next time.